the third and final day in the case of Porter versus Porter. The plaintiff, pop composer Lance Porter, is claiming a declaration against his father, the Reverend Fortescue Porter, to whom he has assigned the copyright of his musical play Jesus Baby, a rock opera treatment of the Nativity. He claims that his father obtained the assignment by fraud. Yesterday, the Reverend Mr. Porter, vicar of a country parish, denied that before the assignment there was an understanding that he would give the proceeds of the show to Lance if he ever needed it. Mrs. Hazel Harper Frost has just entered the witness box to give evidence on behalf of the vicar.
At the Maltings, Little Walmsley near Fulchester?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any occupation, Mrs. Harper Frost?
I am a widow of independent means.
Do you do any voluntary work?
Oh, good heavens, yes, a great deal. I'm a member of the parish council. I am chairman of the voluntary welfare group. I am also on the Sunday school committee, and I organise outings for the old age pensioners. And then, of course, there's the Conservation Society and the Mothers' Union and the Women's Royal Voluntary...
Thank you, Mrs. Harper Frost. I think that gives us a fair indication of the wide range of your activities. Do you know the defendant in this case, the Reverend Fortescue Porter?
Oh, yes, of course. He's our vicar.
Do these charitable works of yours bring you into much contact with him?
Oh, naturally, but quite apart from that, we're close friends as well.
And do you also know his son, the plaintiff in this case?
Oh, yes, I've known Lancelot since he was a little boy. He used to come and use my piano sometimes. They didn't have one at the vicarage. He played very nicely. Really does seem such a pity.
And what seems a pity, Mrs. Harper Frost?
Well, that he didn't go on and make something of himself.
But he has, hasn't he?
Well, I suppose he has, but not in what I would call the musical field.
Have you heard his work at all?
Well, one can't avoid it, can one? You know, I really don't understand the BBC playing that rubbish over and over again. You'd think there was enough noise about already with those enormous great juggernauts and things. Do you know that even in my little village...
I do sympathise with you, Mrs. Harper Frost, but for the moment do you think we could confine ourselves to the musical noises?
Perhaps, Mrs. Harper Frost, you wouldn't describe Mr. Porter's work as musical.
Oh, I most certainly would not. To one who's been brought up on Beethoven, it's a positive assault on the eardrums.
And did the vicar share these opinions?
Oh, yes, we often talked about it. He was deeply distressed that Lance hadn't taken up the organ. You know, it was dreadful to see him wasting his talents in this way.
Now, when did you first hear that Lance was writing a play about the Nativity?
Oh, the vicar told me. Yes, he said that if the play was to make any money at all, it was all to come to him.
What did you feel about that?
Well, I was delighted, naturally. It couldn't happen to a more deserving man.
Were you at all worried about the play itself?
Oh, well, I did hope that it wouldn't turn out to be peculiar, but, well, the main thing was the money, wasn't it? You know, there were so many deserving causes in the parish, and, well, there's nothing like an unexpected little windfall, is there?
You thought it would be just a little windfall?
But I had no idea of telling, no way at all of knowing that this wretched thing would turn to be such a popular success.
When did the vicar first tell you about the play?
It was in January, the end of January 1971, after the telephone call.
At that stage, was there any discussion between yourself and the vicar as to what he should do if his son did give him the copyright and if it did make any money?
Oh, yes, we discussed whether he should keep any of it for himself or whether it should all go to charity.
You are quite sure of the date of this conversation, the end of January 1971, not early February?
Oh, January, I'm quite sure.
Did you know that Lance Porter visited his father on the 1st of February?
Oh, yes, the vicar showed me what do you call it?
The assignment?
Yes.
When?
February the 4th.
How could you be so precise about these dates, Mrs. Harper Frost?
Oh, well, practice, I suppose. I have so many dates to remember. You see, the voluntary welfare group always met on the 4th of every month, and it was after that meeting. I mean that the vicar and I were having the chat.
You're aware that Lance Porter met his father again in February on the 8th. You're sure it wasn't after the 8th that you were shown the assignment?
Quite sure.
Subsequently, after it had been produced, did you go and see the play?
Yes, I went with my sister Violet. She's very interested in music. She works for a recording company, but I must say that her opinion of the play was exactly the same as mine.
And what was your opinion, Mrs. Harper?
Well, I was deeply embarrassed and outraged. I mean, we all know and love the Bible story, and it was horrible to see it depicted in this way.
What way in particular?
Well, it was the language, for one thing. You know, it really was quite disgraceful and so unnecessary. You should have heard the shepherds.
The shepherds?
The ones who watch their flocks by night. I suppose they were intended to be comical, but... Well, I don't want to go into any details, but really their behaviour was distinctly lewd.
And the music accompanying all this?
Indescribable. My sister Violet, who has a deep musical sensibility, was almost physically in pain.
When did you go and see the play?
It was in January of 1972.
And when you returned to Little Walmsley, did you tell the vicar what you had seen and heard?
Oh, yes, of course. I considered it my duty.
How did he react to your description?
Oh, I think he was very shocked.
Did he say anything to you about the copyright?
Yes, he said he could not possibly keep it for himself.
Was it a long discussion?
Well, it was a very terrible situation. I mean, there was no simple answer. What to do with the copyright?
But in the end, did he say what he decided to do?
Oh, yes. We decided that the copyright should be given to the charity. Previously, he had intended only giving the earnings, the royalties. Right.
Now, let's move on a little to April the 12th of last year. Did you go to the vicarage on that date?
Yes, I did. It was at about tea time. I went to discuss the floral arrangements for the church.
Can you remember who was there?
Oh, yes, I remember it distinctly. There was a large foreign car in the drive, which I presume must have been Lancelot's, and he was in the drawing room talking with his father.
Did you get the impression that it was a friendly meeting?
Oh, no. I could hear loud voices the moment I entered the hallway.
Did you overhear part of the conversation?
Well, I couldn't help it. There was quite a dispute going on between them.
What about?
Well, I heard Lancelot asking his father for some money. The sum of £10,000 was being mentioned, and I heard his father say that he couldn't possibly give him that sum. I believe Lancelot was trying to give the impression that he was starving, but of course I knew that wasn't true.
And did you then go in and join them?
Yes, I did. I think Lancelot was extremely embarrassed. As well he might be. He probably knew that I'd seen the play.
Did you mention it to him at all?
Oh, yes, I did. I most certainly did. I told him exactly what I thought of it.
In roughly the same terms you used to describe it in the court?
Oh, stronger, if anything. I don't mince my words when it comes to a matter of right and wrong. I told him that, in my opinion, it was a thoroughly debased entertainment.
Did he make any reply?
I'm sorry to say that he said something extremely rude.
Yes, well, I don't want to cause you any distress, Mrs. Harper-Frost, but could you repeat it to the court?
He said that I was an interfering old bitch. He also said that I had put his father up to it, whatever that was supposed to mean.
I see. And do you consider that you had interfered at all?
Not in the least. As I said, the vicar is a very close friend of mine, and when he asked for my advice, I gave it to him.
And did that advice include any suggestion that he should defraud his son in this way?
Certainly not. And even if I had made such a suggestion, I'm quite certain that he wouldn't have considered it for one single moment. He's not that kind of man.
No. Thank you, Mrs. Harper-Frost.
Is that all?
Oh, I expect my learned friend will have a few questions for you.
Oh, yes, of course, yes. Far away.
Mrs. Harper-Frost, you said just now that it was the vicar's intention to give the copyright of this debased entertainment, as you called it, to charity.
Yes.
You say that, had you decided that from the very beginning that was the best thing to do?
Yes, I believe I had.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that we decided. Does that mean that you decided?
Oh, it was the vicar's decision.
But you played some part in it.
Well, as I said, he asked for my advice, and I gave it gladly.
Would you say that the vicar was a man of wide experience in the handling of money?
Oh, no. He doesn't know anything about that kind of thing at all. That's why he asked me.
So, in a sense, you acted as his financial advisor rather as Mr. Plenderbooth acted for my client.
I have nothing whatever in common with Mr. Plenderbooth. I was not trying to make money for myself.
Well, I'm not suggesting that you were, but you were determined, weren't you, from the very beginning, as you said, that all the earnings from this play should go to charity.
Yes, that's fair.
And that none of it should get back to Lance.
Well, I wouldn't have objected if he'd really been in need of it. But really, a lot of nonsense has been talked about Lance's financial state. He's trying to pretend that he can't get any work, and it simply isn't true.
Are you basing that observation on the fact that he arrived in what you've described as a large foreign car?
Not entirely, no.
Well, how can you possibly know what my client's financial position is?
Well, all I'm prepared to say is that he's not as badly off as he says he is.
But how can you possibly know that?
Well, I simply do, that's all.
But how? Have you got access to his income tax returns? Are you in the confidence of his bank manager?
There's no need to be sarcastic.
Madam, you come into court and make these unsupported allegations.
Well, if you really want to know, it was my sister Violet who told me.
Your sister Violet?
Mrs. Violet Slingsby. She says it's common knowledge in the musical world that Lance is doing extremely well. Some of the songs that he wrote before this play are still making very good money.
I must say, I got the impression that your sister was interested purely in classical music.
She is personal assistant to the chairman of Music International. They cover a very wide field, and one of their subsidiaries controls Lance's recordings. That's how she knows.
I see. And when did you and your sister first discuss the play Jesus Baby?
First discussed? Oh, I really can't remember.
But she did have that job at the end of 1970 and the beginning of 1971, by which time a good deal of the writing had been done.
Oh, yes, she's been there 8 years.
Do you see each other very often?
Well, no, it's very difficult for her to get away, but she does come and spend weekends with me now and again.
And the fact that the son of your friend the vicar was writing a musical which her firm was publishing would naturally be a topic of conversation.
Well, yes, of course.
So you discussed the play in 1971 whilst it was still being written?
Yes, I believe we did.
Now, your sister, in her privileged position, would probably know something about this project before it was ever performed on the London stage. She may even have heard some of the music. I believe it's common practice for something called a demo disc to be recorded so that backers and managements can have some idea of the show beforehand.
Oh, I don't remember my sister Violet saying anything about having heard the music, no.
Had she already formed an opinion of the play?
Well, I don't think she was very much in favour of it. You know, Violet agrees with me there's quite enough of that kind of thing about already.
What kind of thing is that, Mrs. Harperfrost?
So-called entertainment. It usually means pandering to the lowest taste. Quite bestial, some of it.
Do you go to the theatre very often?
No, I don't.
Then what makes you such an authority on it?
Well, as I said before, I sit on a great many committees, and the members are seriously concerned with what passes for entertainment these days. We've even had occasion to write to the Home Secretary more than once.
After going all the way up to London to expose yourself to this bestiality.
But it's very difficult, isn't it, to know what you're going to see, and by the time one has, it's too late, isn't it?
These committees that you speak of, does the vicar sit on them as well?
Yes, some of them.
And are any of them concerned with the upholding of moral standards?
We are not trying to uphold moral standards, we're trying to bring them back.
The committees whose members had occasion to write to the Home Secretary, was the vicar a member of any of those?
Yes, of course he was.
So you and the vicar must often have discussed the decline, as you saw it, of morality, particularly in the field of entertainment.
But it would have been very strange if we hadn't. It's a subject of concern to all decent people.
And would you say that there was any difference of opinion between you on that subject?
Between the vicar and me? Oh, not at all. We see absolutely eye to eye.
Well, he's not a very regular theatre-goer, is he?
Well, no, good heavens, no. He's far too busy.
And then where does he get his opinions from? I mean, on a particular play or film?
Well, from somebody who has seen it, I suppose.
From a newspaper critic, for example.
Well, I'm sorry to say that they very often like things that I most certainly would not. But even when they are enthusiastic, one can usually tell from their descriptions what kind of a spectacle it is.
So you, for instance, sometimes form an opinion of a show simply from what you've read about it?
Yes.
Or from what you've been told about it by somebody else?
Yes.
Your sister Violet, for example.
If my sister Violet saw something and found it unpleasant, the chances would be that I would dislike it too.
I suggest she expressed that dislike from the very beginning when she first heard about it and that you told the vicar what she'd said.
Well, I may have done, but I really don't see what this has got to do with the case. I mean, the vicar's being accused of fraud.
Yes, but nobody's suggesting that his motives are commercial. The only other possibility is that someone had so poisoned his mind against this project that he conceived the idea of using this unexpected gift, the copyright, as a means of punishing his son.
Oh, that's ridiculous. For what?
You heard him in the witness box. He accused Lance of having perverted the Bible story. He hadn't seen the play himself. He got his information from you, didn't he?
After I'd seen it, yes.
And are you asking the jury to believe that your sister, who must have known all about this project from the very beginning, hadn't expressed the most vehement opinions about it at the very start, and that you had not passed on those opinions to your friend, the vicar?
I did not try to influence his opinions in any way at all. I certainly did not suggest that he should commit a fraud.
Thank you, Mrs. Harperfrost.
Lotterby, have you any further questions of this witness?
No further questions, my lord.
Very well, Mrs. Harperfrost, you may leave the box.
That concludes the case for the defendant.
Go on.
Members of the jury, you will no doubt have been surprised at these allegations of fraud that have been levelled against my client, the Reverend Mr. Porter, especially as no word has been said against his character, nothing to suggest that he is otherwise than an honourable man. Well, of course, the explanation for all of this is quite straightforward. The plaintiff decided to give the copyright of the musical play Jesus Baby to his father as a gesture of goodwill. The play was based, however loosely, on the Nativity, a subject which had been suggested by his father, and it seems the plaintiff mistakenly believed it to be an appropriate gift. Well, a legal assignment was drawn up and the copyright given to my client. And then, unexpectedly, incredibly, the show became a huge success. Well, the copyright was worth a great deal of money which was being used entirely on charitable works. And the plaintiff realized he had made a financial blunder. His gesture had cost him dear. And so he invents this story of a prearranged gentleman's agreement. Well, I suggest to you, members of the jury, that there was no such agreement, that if there had been, it would have been included in the legally drawn-up assignment. I do not believe that either Mr. Lance Porter or his business manager are exactly naive when it comes to such matters. My learned friend has suggested that even before that first meeting on February the 1st, my client had already known the kind of entertainment that this nativity play was going to be. How did he know that he was going to be offended by this play that had not yet been written, let alone performed? Well, my learned friend suggests that Mrs. Violet Slingsby, the sister of Mrs. Harper Frost, because she works for Music International, must have had inside information as to the kind of entertainment Mr. Lance Porter was writing, and that this information was passed on to the vicar. Well, I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that if my client had known what his son's treatment of the nativity was going to be, he would have attempted, to use his own words, to dissuade him from profaning the gospel in this way. Well, I submit that the vicar remained in complete ignorance of the nature of this play until much later, when he read about it in the newspapers, and when Mrs. Harper Frost, having been to see the play, told him her opinions. But at the time of this first meeting, on the 1st of February, he had no idea what it was going to be like. Even Mr. Plenderbooth has said that the plaintiff talked about the play, but the vicar wasn't really listening. Was it conceivable that the vicar was sitting there quietly plotting to defraud his son? It's always distressing when one member of a family takes another to court, and you may think that this action would never have started if the sum involved had been, say, £4,000 or £5,000. But the reason why it has been brought, in my submission, is that Mr. Lance Porter made a gift to his father which turned out to be a great deal more valuable than he had anticipated. And he's determined, by any means, fair or foul, to get it back, even if that entails blackening the character of a completely innocent man who was never intended to keep a single penny of this money for himself. It merely remains for you, members of the jury, to decide whether in the original transaction, at the time of the letter of assignment, the defendant agreed to transfer a portion of the copyright income to the plaintiff. Now, this is the question which is submitted to you, as my learned friend agrees. And I submit that the suggestion of repayment is a fabrication made after the original contract, and that you have no alternative but to dismiss this action.
May it please your lordship, members of the jury, the crucial matter in this case is the opinion the defendant formed of his son's work. Now let me remind you of his evidence. The very title of the play he found unspeakably distasteful. It was a degraded entertainment. It profaned the gospel. He agreed it was rather like inheriting a brothel. And yet he was able to swallow this odious pill and put it to good use because God moves in a strange way, he said. What he thought of the play, therefore, and what he did with the copyright are not in dispute. The vital question, then, is when did he form these views? Before the gift of the copyright or after? Even he admitted that he had an idea what the play would be like, though he said he prayed it would not be so. I suggest he had more than an idea. Long before the play was produced, at the end of 1970, when it was still being written, he already had inside information about the project from Mrs. Harper Frost's sister Violet, who was working for the publisher of the company. Yes, members of the jury, he had more than an idea of what the play would be like. And though his mind was poisoned by these two women against the project, he was not able to prevent it being produced. So he decided, then and there, to turn it to his own ends. And I suggest that in order to do so, he deliberately misled his son as to his true intentions. Now, my friend has stressed the fact that his client is an upright and honourable man, a man of God, and has asked you to reject the possibility that he lied and is lying as inconceivable. But is it? The vicar has been able to carry out many of his most cherished designs, many good works, and God does, after all, sometimes move in a mysterious way. Now, is there anything improbable about the plaintiff's case, that before making the gift he discussed with his father what his father would do with it? Isn't this what anybody would do? Remember that they all contemplated the possibility that the play might make money. What would be more natural than for a son to express concern to his altruistic father that if the gift were made, his father would not give it all away? All this considered, I submit that there was an agreement between the defendant and the plaintiff at the time of the assignment. An agreement that part of the sum earned by the play Jesus Baby would be awarded to the writer, my client, if he so requested. Members of the jury, whilst I accept that the burden of proof lies on my client, I submit that he has more than discharged it, and I ask you to find for him accordingly.
Now, members of the jury, fraud has a very special meaning. It means obtaining something by a statement of fact, which the person making that statement knew to be false or knew very well that it might be false at the time that he made it. Now, in this case, it is said that the defendant made a false statement as to his intentions, and that the plaintiff was induced by that statement to make the assignment of the copyright. Now, the defense is that the statement as to the defendant's intentions was not made until after the assignment, and second, that that statement was true. Now, you must ask yourselves, as counsel have requested in the agreed question submitted to you, whether the defendant verbally agreed to grant part of the income of the copyright to the plaintiff at the time of the original assignment. Now, it is important for you to remember that the burden of proof is on the plaintiff, Lance Porter, and the proof in civil cases must be established on the balance of probabilities, a much less stringent condition than proof beyond reasonable doubt, which is the standard applied in criminal cases. Now, the upshot of that is that uncertainties must be resolved by you in favour of the defendant. Now, members of the jury, will you kindly retire to consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Have you decided answers to the counsel's questions to which you are all agreed?
Yes.
On the first question, was an unwritten agreement entered into by the plaintiff and the defendant that a part of the copyright income be returned to the plaintiff if he so requested?
Yes.
Then the second question, what damages do you award to the plaintiff?
We award possession of the copyright plus the remaining £20,000 as agreed by the charitable trustees, but nothing further.
Lord, in accordance with the jury's answers, I ask that the judgment be recorded for my plaintiff, the client. I am instructed to ask.
Next week, join us again when our cameras return to see another leading case in the Crown Court.